Hi, Five Oaks and Rachel Carson Falcons. Welcome to another episode of Read with Force. I'm Mrs. Omerman and here with my friend, Mrs. Perenboom. Hi, Mrs. Perenboom.
Hello, Mrs. Zimmerman. Happy Friday. Well, for us, it's Friday.
For us, it's Friday. For you guys, who knows when you're listening to this, but happy day.
Happy day,
everyone. And we are so happy to welcome Mrs. Streit today. Hi, Mrs. Streit.
Hi.
So Mrs. Streit is one of the first people that I met when I got to Five Oaks and has since given me so many great book recommendations. So I can't wait for her to share some with you. But for those who don't know you, Mrs. Streit, how long have you been at Five Oaks? How long have you been teaching? What's your story?
I think this is my 7th year at Five Oaks, teaching 6th grade humanities the whole time. Mrs. Perenboom agrees, that must be right. Okay.
Well, we started the same year, so yes.
You know it's 7? I always have to count.
I'm pretty sure. 7, 4, 5,
and then
6, 7, yes.
I was at West Tualatin View Elementary School, and I taught 3rd grade and 4th grade and 5th grade, not all at the same time. And I 5th was one of my favorite years there to teach. I really liked 5th graders, which is actually what prompted me to come to middle school, because I thought, I like 5th graders so much, I bet you I'll like 6th graders even more. I was a bit of a reader. I was the daughter of a librarian, so I really didn't have any choice. It was interesting. I grew up out in the country, and my mom would go off to work at the library. She went back to work when I was in 4th grade. And so she would go off to work at the library. I'd go to school and come home. And I never actually went to the library because she would just bring the books home to me. And so I would read whatever she brought home. So she was the one that kind of selected my books for me. She was a pretty good selector. She had some good choices for me. So I was happy with that. But it was a lot of like realistic fiction, historical fiction, fantasy, science fiction, only in terms of Madeline L'Engle. I read all of those, but yeah, I think we stuck mostly to the realistic and historical fiction. I think I always wanted to be a teacher anyway. Interestingly, I just always worked with kids. I started babysitting when I was like 10 or 11. I started teaching swimming lessons when I was 16. I started being a camp counselor as soon as I was old enough. And I just always liked working around kids. Yes. The one that we were just talking about that you reminded me that I recommended to you is a book called Diamond Willow by Helen Frost. And I'm a book cover judger, like Mrs. Perenboom admits to being. And I tell my kids that all the time. I totally judge covers. I mean, that's why it's a job, right? To design book covers. We judge them. And this one was in my classroom for a long time, and I resisted reading it because I didn't like the cover. I didn't like the picture of the girl. It was all weirdly blue, and I was like, meh. So I never read it. I finally picked it up a few years ago. I was like, okay, I'm just going to read this. I can't remember why. And then it's a novel in verse, and I've talked to my students in years past about reading novels in verse, and how one of the great things about a novel in verse is the amount of white space that you have on a page. So it's, maybe not as intimidating as some of the longer books. And then I want to show you also, all of the pages have their verse written in the shape of a diamond. And it's not always the same shape exactly. But it's all purposely in the form of a diamond. And of course, the book is called Diamond Willow. And so it's the girl's name. It's also a type of tree. And it's also this fantastic metaphor for other things that are going on in the book. Now, not only does she write in verse in the shape of a diamond, and I don't know if I can hold the book close enough here, but maybe you can see how some of the words are bolded out. And so in the middle of each of these pages, there's like a secret message of bolded words. So you read the page. I mean, it's a beautiful book. It's a story that goes on as novels in verse do. It's all connected. It's a story. But then there's this secret message on each page that you have to kind of look for and decide, ooh, why did she use those words? What does that mean? What is that telling me? And so it's almost like you kind of have to read it on a couple levels at the same time.
Okay, now I'm totally intrigued. Thank you.
Yeah, I can tell your eyes are like, whoa, what? So get beyond the cover, because it's just amazing. And I was telling you that I read this again. I just got it out of the public library yesterday to remind myself of what the book was about. And I read it before going to bed. It's a pretty quick read. That's another thing that I tell students sometimes. If you're afraid of getting involved in like a super long book, this one's pretty quick. I read it in like about an hour before I went to bed last night. And it's a journey. You know, I think it's about a 12-year-old girl who lives in Alaska, and she wants her parents to see that she's independent enough to take the dog sled and mush them to her grandparents' house all by herself. And for a long time, her parents are like, no, 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 no. And finally they say yes. And so she's on this trip to kind of prove that she's independent, that she's old enough, that she's responsible. And then of course something happens and you're like, oh, and it's kind of tragic. It's also about a relationship between humans and animals, in this case, her dog. And how does she recover from that? And how does she kind of make peace with who she is in kind of many different ways? And it's amazing how much the author can pack in this short little book. And if if you're like a pet person, but I'm a pet person, I love all pets. And this one is about the relationship between a girl and her dog. It made me cry. I was a little bit sad last night. So, but then it has a good ending.
Okay. All right. So
you
can
see,
list.
You can see why I depend on Mrs. Streit to recommend books.
I liked it because it touched my heart. You know,
Those are the best books.
But it really touched my heart. So this book is called The Red Pencil. And it's written by, I don't know if I'm saying her name right. I don't know if it's Andrea Davis Pinkney.
I have to say, I'm just going to say, I don't know how to pronounce it either. I love all of her books, but because my full name is Andrea, that's how I pronounce it.
And this one you recommended to me several years ago. I don't know if we recommended these like in passing at the same time, but it was on my list for a long time until I finally had a chance to read it. And then I was like, ooh, that is a keeper. And coincidentally, I didn't really intend to do this on purpose. This is also a novel in verse. So you can see, again, there's a lot of white space on each page. Now this book is a little bit longer than the other one. But one thing I like about novels in verse is that I feel like with any poetry, the author has to be very careful about the words they choose. And therefore the words have even more of an impact. They seem even more special when you have to be careful about which ones and how many you use. And so I was constantly aware of the author's craft throughout the whole story, and how beautiful the language is. It's like reading a song. So let me tell you.
Great description.
Let me read a little bit about the back here. Another 12-year-old girl. Finally, Amira is 12. She wants to learn and to read and write, to set free all the big ideas she finds herself sketching in the sand. But girls like Amira don't go to school. Still, she can't help but hope for something more. Her dreams are pushed aside when the Janjaweed militia storms her small village, shattering life as she knows it. As Amira starts a long journey toward a new life at a refugee camp, she feels her spirit slipping away until the gift of one red pencil opens her mind and all kinds of possibilities. So this is a historical fiction. This talks about some of the civil war and the strife going on in Sudan. And for me, it was really interesting to read about what's going on in another part of the world that I don't know that much about, and to really kind of experience a day in the life, longer than a day, but to really get into what her life was like. And it was eye-opening in that way. And another thing that spoke to me is her resilience. You know, this terrible tragedy. She loses part of her family. Oh, also heart touching. Oh, it's a spoiler, but there's an animal. There's a good pet.
Oh.
That spoke to me as well. And her resilience. The way she comes back from all this tragedy, it just makes me think, okay, if she can do it, you know, surely whatever I'm dealing with, I can deal with. And so to speak to that point, the one line that has always stuck with me to this day, I say to myself all the time. Her dad was this great figure in her life, and he would play this game called What Else is Possible? The only real rule for our game is that answers to the question, what else is possible, can only be good. So for example, Dondo goes first. If you wake to find your sandals gone, do you worry? Dondo answers his own question. This is how the game works. He says, worrying is a waste of time. Better to ask, what else is possible? He insists your sandals may not be gone at all, only missing, while a generous hand mends their worn edges. And he just kind of continues, you know, what else is possible? And to this day, when I am feeling like closed in and like my choices are limited, or my power is limited, or I'm just feeling stuck, then I think to myself, oh, red pencil, what else is possible? And that one little phrase just opens up all these doors, like, oh, and it kind of gets my creative thinking going on, like, how else can I solve this problem? How else can I think about this situation or this person or whatever it is? What else is possible? And it's so freeing, it's so liberating. So I have this other book, a lot of you have seen this one. This is a more recent book, I think, in our collection. This is called Refugee by Alan Gratz. He's written a number of books that you might have seen. Many of them are about World War II. What's interesting about this book, yes, it's historical fiction again, but it weaves together 3 different stories. So we're talking about, we're talking about somebody from World War II. I think it's 1938. It's a Jewish family who is fleeing Nazi Germany. 1994, they are fleeing Cuba because of the situation going on there. And yes, with, I think, Fidel Castro. And then the fourth one is, the third one, I can't count, is a family in 2015 who is fleeing their Syrian homeland because there is war going on in Syria. And so it's interesting the way it takes these 3 time periods and these 3 places in different parts of the world. And we hear from one family, and then we hear the next chapter is the next family, and then the next family. And then it's almost like a braid that gets woven together. And Alan Gratz is a really good storyteller in that he's kind of always leaving you on the edge of your seat, like, oh my gosh, how could it get any worse? What's going to happen next? And I don't know what's going to happen. And then he'll flip to the next person's story, and you're like, ah, don't go there. I need to know what happens to that story. But then he switches to the other person and kind of builds you up, and you're like, ah, what's going to happen? And then he switches to the other person. You're like, ah. So all these ups and downs throughout the whole book. And you know, with historical fiction, it's just so fascinating to me to hear from other people in other circumstances, And it's not just reading a history book. You're like, living these people's lives with them for a short period of time, real people that you can relate to. And these are young people in their, teens, probably early teens, middle school age-ish, maybe. So I think that students at our school could really relate to these stories. And then there's kind of a cool little twist at the end where,
well, I need to ask now, because students, I've been trying to get Mrs. Perenboom to read this book for quite a long time, and she keeps saying that she can't get into it, even though it's one of my favorites, and Mrs. Streit just made it sound so exciting. So is that exciting enough for you, Mrs. Perenboom, to give it another try?
Yes, it's sitting on my bedside table. I brought a copy home from school and I'm like, I'm gonna read this, I'm gonna read this. Okay, I am committed to trying again during spring break. When I have time to commit to sit and read, I'm committed to Refugee being my spring break read.
How about you, Mrs. Perenboom? Do you have any good books for us this week?
All right, so I was looking through Sora to see what books I've read in ebooks, and one of the books that came up was this book called It Wasn't Me. And I was totally a book cover judger on this one also, because it has 6 little snapshots on the front, and each snapshot picture that's like obviously a school picture is covered with a different like emoji. Like there's a different picture in front of it, so it's blocking out the kids' faces. And I was like, I don't know about that. But I finally picked it up, and this is a story. It's a mystery. These 6 kids all go to school together. They're in middle school, and one of the students is an artist, and he has created some amazing artwork, and the school has put it on display in like their common area. And he comes into school one day, and there's been some vandalism to his artwork. And he's pretty devastated that like something horrible, like somebody did something horrible to his artwork. And this group of kids end up in detention, like they're all suspects in this damage. And so these kids end up in detention and are realizing that like things are not always what they seem, and people are not always who they appear to be. And there's a whole lot of learning and growing and thinking about each other and how we relate to each other in their attempt to figure out like, I didn't do it, let me out of here. I'm going to prove to you that I didn't do it, and I need to find out who did. So it's a great story about friendship and sticking up for what you believe in and solving a good mystery. Okay, Ms. Zimmerman, what books do you have to share with us today?
Okay, so mine is a nonfiction book, and I was so excited to get it in our last shipment last week. I actually read this book. This is another one of those books that was kind of written for adults, but it was so good that then they made a young readers edition. They cut out, some of the things maybe that aren't inappropriate, or maybe they think young people would find boring, and make it just for young people. This one is written by Abby Wambach. A lot of you know her as a soccer player, star soccer player a few years ago before she retired from playing. But she wrote a book called Wolfpack. And actually, it didn't even start out to be a book. It started out as a commencement speech, a graduation speech at Barnard College in New York. And people loved that speech so much. They said, take what you wrote and make it a book. And I read it. Now, let me tell you, I don't do sports. All right. So any kind of soccer reference or sports reference, it usually goes like way over my head. And I don't even read books by sports people, right? Like musical theater, I got you. I'm right there. Sports, no. But something about this book interested me. And there's one more thing I have to tell you. A while ago, we told you there's no such thing as girl books and boy books. And I still believe that. And if boys would like to read this book by Abby Wambach, I say go ahead. But I will tell you that Abby wrote the book Wolfpack for girls, for women. And it's a book to tell you that you're not Red Riding Hood on the path, wondering where to go. You're the wolf. All right. And so Abby Wambach is telling girls to stand up for yourself, be strong, support each other, right? How many times, especially in middle school, are there just groups of mean girls around, right? That's horrible. It's the worst thing for me, a pet peeve of mine, actually, to see mean girls and girls not including each other. And so Abby Wambach just goes on and says, no, this is our job. Our job is to support one another. Our job is to be the wolf, to stand up for ourselves. Our job is to lead from wherever you are or we are. So Abby was talking about one time, you know, she was on the bench and she's a star player, right? And one time she was benched and she could have been all pouty and sorry for herself and they're not as good as me. Why am I on the bench? But she wasn't. She changed her attitude and she was a leader from the bench, leading people on, right? And so how many times are we jealous of other girls because maybe they have something that we think we deserve or that we want? But what would happen if instead of being jealous and feeling sorry for ourselves, we stood up and congratulated each other and were just positive with one another? And I bet middle school, if we all listen to these rules, would be a way better experience for all of us. The three of us right here, Mrs. Straight, Mrs. Parentboom, and myself, we were all middle school girls. And so we know things haven't changed that much. You guys have devices in your hands now. That's about all that's changed from us being in middle school. And so we know, and I just love this book. If I could afford it, I would buy a copy for every single girl at our school. That's how much I love it. So we do have it. I think we also have it on Sora. I would have to check 100%, but I know definitely you could find it Washington County Library if our copy is checked out. And of course you can put it on hold for Destiny Discover. So, and also that's been my go-to gift for people too, is a copy of Wolfpack. I like it that much. I like Wolfpack that much.
It is on Washington County, but we do not have it in our Sora.
Okay, maybe I can talk to our district librarians and change that because I think that everybody needs to read it. And I'm sorry, boys and males, you can read it. It's not like you can't read it, but it is for girls to stick up for themselves. Maybe you should read it, actually. Maybe you should read it, actually, just to get an idea of what the other half might be going through sometimes. So I want to say thank you for joining us for another episode. And Mrs. Streit, thank you so much for being here with us.
It was fun. Thank you.
I'm so glad. Well, you guys have a great spring break. We will see you when we get back. And I hope you spend the whole week just discovering what it is that you want to read next. All right. You guys have a great holiday and we will see you soon. Bye.
Bye.